3 million pages of evidence, thousands of unsealed flight logs, millions of data points, names, themes, and timelines connected. You are listening to the Epstein Files, the world's first AI-native investigation into the case that traditional journalism simply could not handle.
Welcome back to the Epstein Files. Last time, we walked through Vivini indictment. Today, we are following the first suicide attempt through the documentary records, so the timeline, decisions, and institutional failures are clear. As always, every document and source we reference is available at epsteinfiles.fm. So start with July 23, 2019. That is where the paper trail becomes specific and testable.
Precisely. To understand August 10th, you have to audit July 23. The Bureau of Prisons documents don't treat them as separate events. They're points on a line, a timeline of institutional failure.
Okay, so let's establish the baseline facts for that morning. Tuesday, July 23, 2019. Epstein is in the Metropolitan Correctional Center, the MCC, in Manhattan. The first official notice we have of an incident comes from the internal event log. What does that log state?
The log flags a medical emergency. It's in the Special Housing Unit, the SHU, and the description of the inmate's condition is stark.
How so?
The specific terminology used by the responding officers is semi-conscious.
Semi-conscious. Now, in a clinical document, that's not a vague term. It has a very specific meaning.
It does. It means an altered mental state. He's not fully aware, not fully responsive to stimuli, either verbal or physical. It immediately tells you this isn't a minor injury. It suggests something systemic, a neurological issue, maybe toxicology, or in this case, hypoxia, lack of oxygen.
And that conclusion, hypoxia, is backed up by what the guards saw.
Yes. The same internal communications document the physical evidence. First, marks on his neck.
Which indicates some kind of ligature or pressure?
Correct. But the second detail is the more critical forensic indicator. The report states he was blue in the face.
Cyanosis.
Cyanosis. It's a textbook sign of severe oxygen deprivation. For an adult's face to show cyanosis, the restriction of blood flow or air has to be significant and sustained. This wasn't something that happened for a few seconds. Whatever took place in that cell went on long enough to fundamentally change his physiology.
So the physical evidence is clear. A life-threatening event occurred. How did the institution classify it? We have entry 54 in the administrative log.
Entry 54 is the moment the bureaucracy applies a label. And that label is apparent suicide attempt.
Apparent. So there's some ambiguity built in.
There is. But that label is a switch. Once it's flipped, it triggers a cascade of mandatory protocols. It determines everything that happens next, his housing, his monitoring, the clothes he's allowed to wear. Everything changes once those 3 words are in the file.
But looking at the narrative sections of the same reports, that label seems contested from the start.
It is. The initial reports acknowledge a conflict in the story. The physical evidence proves what happened. Strangulation or hanging. It doesn't prove how. Was it self-inflicted? Or was it an assault by his cellmate?
So you have 2 completely different possibilities on the table.
2 possibilities with vastly different security implications. But the immediate priority isn't the investigation, it's the medical response.
Which is standard procedure. Stabilize the patient first.
Exactly. The internal reports show that the medical staff's job is to treat the symptoms, the neck trauma, the hypoxia. Determining who caused it is a problem for the security investigators, not the medics.
But because the security team couldn't immediately rule out self-harm.
The institution defaults to the safest option from a liability standpoint.
Explain that. Why is suicide attempt the default?
Risk management. Think of the 2 scenarios. If you call it an assault and you're wrong, and he then successfully commits suicide the next day, the MCC is facing a massive lawsuit for negligence, for ignoring his mental state.
Okay.
But if you call it a suicide attempt and you're wrong and was actually an assault, you've still moved him into a higher security environment. You've put him on suicide watch, which is the safest possible place in a prison.
So that label, apparent suicide attempt, covers more legal and procedural bases for the institution.
It triggers the most restrictive and therefore safest protocol. It contains the problem, regardless of its origin.
Which brings us to the origin, to the other person in that cell. We can't analyze this event without discussing Nicholas Tartaglione.
No, you can't. And this is where the institutional logic starts to break down. The decision to place Epstein in a cell with Tartaglione is, from a correctional management perspective, completely baffling.
Let's lay out who Nicholas Tartaglione is. The record is clear on this.
He's a former police officer. At the time, he was a pretrial detainee facing the federal death penalty.
Not just for a single crime.
No. He was charged in a racketeering conspiracy that involved a drug deal gone wrong, leading to the kidnapping and quadruple homicide of 4 men.
These were brutal execution-style killings. The bodies were buried on his property.
This is a man accused of extreme premeditated violence. And you also have the physical aspect. Tartaglione was a bodybuilder, a huge, physically imposing man. Epstein was 66, not in good health. The physical disparity was enormous.
So, to be clear, the Bureau of Prisons took a high-profile, non-violent defendant whose safety was a primary concern and locked him in a small room with a man accused of 4 murders and who was facing the death penalty.
Yes, that was the housing assignment. And they'd been in that cell together since early July. For weeks.
Which sets the stage for the conflicting narratives of July 23. What was Tartaglione's story?
His legal team put forward what we can call the rescue narrative. They claimed that Tartaglione found Epstein in the act of hanging himself.
And that he intervened.
That he raised the alarm, called the guards, and effectively saved Epstein's life.
A narrative that obviously benefits him. It reframes him as a hero, not a violent criminal. A useful point to make when you're fighting a death penalty case.
Of course. It's a powerful character argument. This man saves lives. He doesn't just take them. But the internal investigators at the MCC had to weigh that against the other, more obvious possibility.
That Tartaglione attacked him.
That a man facing the death penalty for quadruple murder tried to kill his cellmate. Was it an attempted hit? Was it extortion? Was it just a violent dispute? They had to investigate it as a potential crime scene.
Do the documents show what that investigation found?
We can only infer the outcome from what didn't happen. If you review Tartaglione's court docket after July 23, there are no new charges.
No assault charge, no charge for attempted murder.
Nothing. There's no record of any formal disciplinary action against him for the incident in the files we have. So the institution officially concluded he didn't do it.
Or, perhaps more accurately, they concluded they couldn't prove he did it. Think about it. It's a locked room. No cameras with a clear view of the interior. Epstein himself is semi-conscious, potentially with memory loss from the hypoxia. It becomes one man's word against an unconscious man's.
The suicide story becomes the path of least resistance. It does. They did separate them immediately, which is standard procedure in any case. But by not charging Tartaglione, the BOP effectively rubber-stamped the suicide attempt classification. If it wasn't an assault, it had to be self-harm.
And if it was self-harm, that triggers the next set of protocols, the ones that follow him from the hospital back to the prison.
Correct. This is the protocol shift. The administrative response is immediate. Once he's medically cleared from the hospital, he's brought back to the MCC. But he does not go back to a standard cell in the SHU.
He's placed on formal suicide watch.
Formal suicide watch. And it's important to understand what that actually means inside the federal prison system. It's not just checking on someone more often.
Describe the environment.
It's an environment of total sensory and instrumental deprivation. The goal is to remove any object that could be used for self-harm. He's put in an observation room, often with solid concrete furniture, nothing that can be broken or moved.
And his clothing is taken.
All personal clothing is removed. He's issued what's called a suicide smock. It's a very thick, tear-resistant, quilted gown that fastens with Velcro. It's designed specifically so it can't be torn or twisted into a ligature.
What about other items? Bedding?
Gone. No bedsheets, no blankets, no towels. At most, he might get a similar tear-resistant blanket. Shoelaces, belts, any personal items are removed. Even his legal papers might be restricted.
It's a complete stripping of autonomy.
And it's coupled with the most important part of the protocol, the observation.
Which is?
Continuous, direct, 24-hour visual observation. A guard is posted right outside the cell with the direct line of sight. Their only job is to watch him. They have to be able to see him breathing. They log his behavior every 15 minutes, but the watch itself is constant. It never stops.
So on July 24th, the day after the incident, the system is performing exactly as designed.
That's the key point. The system identified a lethal risk, and it deployed its most effective tool to mitigate that risk. The bureaucracy in this moment worked. Jeffrey Epstein was, for that week, probably in the safest place he could possibly be.
But this process, being on watch, it generates its own paper trail, specifically psychological records.
It does. An inmate on suicide watch must be seen by a psychologist daily. Evaluations, clinical notes, treatment plans, all of this is supposed to be generated and filed. We know these records exist. The index of documents confirms it.
But we can't see them.
Large portions of them are marked withheld in the public document releases. most likely due to medical privacy rules. But the effect is that we're looking at a black box. We see the administrative order place him on suicide watch, but we can't see the clinical data. We don't know what he was saying to the doctors.
Whether he was admitting he was suicidal or denying it, or maybe he was sticking to a story that Tartaglione attacked him.
We have no way of knowing. And that black box, that missing clinical justification, becomes the absolute core of the problem when we get to the next decision.
The decision to take him off suicide watch.
Yes. This is where the story turns. The timeline is the entire case here. The documents show he's removed from suicide watch around July 29th or 30th.
So let's trace this. On Tuesday the 23rd, he's found blue in the face with marks on his neck.
A catastrophic medical event.
By the following Monday or Tuesday, less than a week later, he's deemed no longer a suicide risk and is cleared.
Cleared to be returned to a regular cell with a bed sheet.
Who can make that decision? It can't be a corrections officer.
No. Custody staff have zero authority to remove someone from watch. That decision rests exclusively with the psychology department and requires a formal face-to-face evaluation by a doctoral-level psychologist. A PhD has to sign off.
A psychologist has to certify in writing that this inmate is no longer an imminent threat to himself.
Correct. A doctor had to look at a man who nearly died from strangulation 6 days earlier and conclude that he was safe.
And because of that black box you mentioned, we don't have the paperwork that explains that conclusion.
We don't have the why. We have the outcome, but not the rationale. We cannot read the doctor's clinical notes justifying this decision.
So we're left to question the logic. Is it plausible he could have manipulated the psychologist?
It's a very strong possibility. Epstein's entire life was based on manipulation. He could have been extremely convincing. Imagine he tells the psychologist, "I was never suicidal. Tartaglione attacked me. He tried to kill me. The whole suicide story is a misunderstanding."
If the psychologist believes that story, the logic for removing him from watch makes a certain kind of sense.
It follows a logic, yes. If you believe he's not suicidal but a victim of assault, then he doesn't need a suicide smock. He needs protection from his attacker. And since Tartaglione was already moved, the problem appears solved.
But that logic runs directly into the contradiction from before.
The huge contradiction. If the institution truly believed Epstein's story that it was an assault, why weren't there any charges filed against Nicholas Tartaglione?
You can't have it both ways.
You can't. The institution's actions are completely inconsistent. By not charging Tartaglione, they implicitly endorsed the suicide attempt theory. But by removing Epstein from suicide watch so quickly, they acted as if they believed the assault theory.
They took a path that followed neither protocol correctly.
And embraced the risks of both. And we see them grappling with this after the fact. In documents generated after August 10th, internal BOP staff are debating theories of Epstein's death. They're looking back at this exact week, trying to figure out what went wrong. The fact they were still debating theories proves the decision was not clear-cut.
So the decision is made. He's removed from watch. He's sent back to the special housing unit. And this is where we have to look at the broader institutional patterns. This decision wasn't made in a vacuum.
No, it wasn't. And to understand the context, you have to go back more than a decade. You have to look at a letter from 2006 from Michael Ryder, the police chief in Palm Beach.
From the original investigation.
From the very beginning. In that letter to the state attorney, Ryder documents a pattern of what he calls highly unusual treatment of Epstein by the justice system. Unprecedented deals, secret non-prosecution agreements, work release privileges no other inmate received.
You're saying there's a documented history of the system bending its own rules for this specific individual.
A documented history of the Epstein exception. The rules that applied to everyone else did not always seem to apply to him. So when you see a psychologist make a risky, aggressive decision to clear him from suicide watch in under a week,
you have to ask if that decision was purely clinical.
Or if it was influenced by this historical pattern of special treatment. Was there pressure from somewhere to normalize his status, to get him off this highly restrictive watch? The record doesn't say, but the pattern is there.
Let's talk about that normalization. He's back in the SHU. What is the standard procedure for an inmate just coming off suicide watch?
Best practice, and often BOP policy, calls for a step-down approach. You don't go from 100 to 0. The most common step-down is ensuring the inmate has a cellmate.
The buddy system.
Right. It provides a level of passive monitoring and social contact, both of which are known to reduce suicide risk. It puts another set of eyes in the cell.
So when Epstein returned to his cell in the SHU at the end of July, who was his new cellmate?
Nobody. He was placed in a cell alone.
They removed Tartaglione, which was necessary, but they never replaced him.
They never replaced him. So think of the layers of safety. First, they removed the professional 247 observation of the suicide watch. Then they failed to implement the peer observation of a cellmate. They peeled back the defenses one by one.
And the final layer of defense is the staff themselves, the guards making the rounds.
And that layer was also compromised. The documents reference overexertion among the MCC staff.
This wasn't just a few tired employees, it was a systemic problem.
The MCC was in a staffing crisis. It was dangerously understaffed. The documents describe guards being forced to work massive amounts of overtime, 16-hour double shifts, day after day.
What does that kind of fatigue do to security protocols?
It destroys them. Human vigilance has limits. When you're that exhausted, rounds get skipped, corners get cut. You see the phenomenon of pencil whipping the logs, where a guard will fill out the sheet saying they did the 30-minute check, but they never actually left their desk.
So the human component of the security system was collapsing under the strain.
It was. And that brings us to the technological component, the surveillance cameras.
We all know the camera story from August 10, but you're saying there were issues on July 23 as well.
The issues were already present. The documentation from the investigation into the July 23 incident shows that when they tried to pull the video footage to see what happened...
To verify Tertullian's story.
Exactly. They ran into problems. The report mentions confusion about which camera was aimed where, the angle they had apparently captured the common area or the cell door, but not the interior. There was no clear shot of what happened inside that cell.
So to be absolutely clear, is there any video evidence in the unsealed files that resolves the question of what happened on July 23?
No. There is nothing. No video that proves it was a suicide attempt and no video that proves it was an assault. The primary visual record is, for all intents and purposes, blind.
Which leaves us with a number of unresolved gaps in the official record. The biggest one is that psychological black box.
That's the core of it.
Yeah.
We know that a decision was made to remove him from watch. We do not have the document that explains why. The clinical rationale that a doctor used to justify that decision is missing.
There's also a physical evidence gap related to the injuries themselves.
Yes. This gets into the forensics. On July 23, we have marks on his neck. Then, on August 10th, the autopsy finds multiple fractures in his neck bones, including the hyoid bone.
The hyoid fracture is often pointed to as evidence of homicide by strangulation rather than hanging.
It's more commonly associated with strangulation, that's true, but the July 23 event throws a huge wrench in that analysis. If he sustained enough neck trauma on July 23 to turn blue, it is medically possible that the hyoid bone was already fractured or weakened during that first incident. We don't know the extent of the internal injuries from July 23.
So the key piece of forensic evidence from the August 10 autopsy could potentially have been caused 2.5 weeks earlier.
It introduces a massive amount of forensic ambiguity. The pathologist on August 10 was examining a neck that had suffered major trauma twice in less than a month. Without a baseline, without x-rays or a CT scan from his hospital visit on July 23, you can't say for sure when that bone broke.
And do we have those scans from the hospital visit?
They are not in the publicly released files. If they exist, they remain withheld. So that critical forensic question remains unanswered.
So let's synthesize this. When you lay out the entire timeline, a pattern emerges.
A very clear pattern of sequential failure. It's a 4-step process.
Step 1.
Step 1 is the warning shot, July 23. The system is put on notice that there is a lethal threat to this inmate. The intervention. The system responds correctly. Suicide watch is implemented. The protocol works.
Step 3.
The reversal. The protocol is rescinded just 6 days later based on a clinical justification that is not available to us, a decision that goes against a conservative risk management approach.
And the final step.
The collapse. The remaining less intensive safety protocols are also neglected. He's left without a cellmate, and the guards responsible for monitoring him are overworked to the point of systemic failure.
It's not a single mistake. It's a chain of decisions, each one increasing the risk.
Each one removing a layer of protection until there were none left. And the ultimate result of that chain is documented. It's the nol prosequi filing.
The legal notice dismissing the indictment.
It's the government formally stating that the case is over because the defendant is deceased. It is the final documented admission of custodial failure. The primary job of the Bureau of Prisons was to get him to trial. And this sequence of decisions made that impossible.
So to conclude on the central question of July 23 attempt versus assault, what do the documents prove?
The documents prove the question remains officially unresolved. But they also prove something more important. The institution's response, putting him on suicide watch, shows They initially treated the risk of self-harm as credible and real. They acknowledged the danger.
And the subsequent removal from watch proves they then reevaluated that danger and dismissed it.
They dismissed it. And that decision to recategorize the risk, to declare him safe, is the single action that made everything on August 10 possible.
We have the report of the incident. We have the order putting him on watch. We have the order taking him off.
But the piece we don't have is the psychological evaluation that supposedly justified that removal. That's the missing link in the chain, the missing page in the file.
The system had a dress rehearsal on July 23. It saw the threat, it deployed the solution, and then, less than a week later, it chose to dismantle that solution.
It voluntarily dismantled its own safety net. And that set the stage for the inevitable.
Next time, August 10th, 2019.
You have just heard an analysis of the official record. Every claim, name, and date mentioned in this episode is backed by primary source documents. You can view the original files for yourself at epsteinfiles.fm. If you value this data-first approach to journalism, please leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening right now. It helps keep this investigation visible. We'll see you in the next file.